My name's Russ Christianson. I'm a cooperative developer. I work with the Ontario Co-operative Association, and I live on a farm near Campbellford. I'd like to thank Larry Gordon. Where's Larry? Oh, there he is, working, for organizing this together with CSI. It's great. Larry's working for the Ontario Co-operative Association. And I just wanted to let you know that cooperatives like to work together with other cooperatives. So how many people here are a member of a credit union or a housing co-op, or just hold your hands up? So quite a few people, so you know about co-ops a little bit, and you know about the international cooperative principles. Co-ops operate on the basis of 7 principles internationally that they all agree to, and they have a value system, etc. I think that given the challenges of our times, even though some of our governments would like to deny that these things are happening, for example, climate chaos, I think cooperatives provide a great opportunity for people to work together to make transformation in society and to really look at a triple or a quadruple bottom line for businesses. And anyone heard of Henry Mintzberg? Henry Mintzberg, yeah, he's a management consultant, right? Well known. He's a professor at McGill University. But I agree with Henry when he says that cooperatives are the structure of the future for business. And the International Cooperative Alliance has a blueprint for a cooperative decade that you can download from the ICA, International Cooperative Alliance, that talks about making cooperatives the #1 business structure over the coming years. So since the global economic collapse in 2008, cooperatives have grown by 20% globally. They've gone from 800 million members to over 1 billion members in the last 5 years. So that's a 20% increase. Not too many businesses could talk about that or say that. So as a socioeconomic movement, cooperatives are powerful, they're here to stay, and there are many, many opportunities available. So there's some statistics on the PowerPoint slide there. Talks about, these are Canadian statistics, baby boomers in Canada. I'm one. I'm near the tail end of the baby boom. So I was born in 1959. The very end of the baby boom is 64, 65. So it's post-Second World War children. And you can see like almost a third of the population is baby boomers, right? This demographic has had a huge impact on the economy and on social planning in Canada since the baby boomers came around. So when they were all kids, guess when all the schools were built, right? So when there's a housing boom, it's because the baby boomers are all getting out and buying houses. So when baby boomers are retiring, we not only have opportunities, but we have a big challenge. Who's going to buy all these businesses? There's 550,000 small and medium-sized enterprises across Canada that are going to be for sale over the next 5 or 10 years. And there's no way there's enough buyers from a traditional point of view. So what's going to happen to those businesses? What's going to happen in your community when those businesses close and there's no buyer to take over those services? Your people, particularly, I live in a rural community. It's called Campbellford. It's southeast of Peterborough on the Trent River, and it's 3,500 people. In rural communities, when business owners, are thinking of retiring, then what's going to happen to that service in that community if you can't find some way to retain the service, right? To retain that business. So this is a great opportunity. Unfortunately, the federal government, other than through the BDC, the Business Development, these used to be called the Business Development Bank of Canada, but now it's just BDC, Business Development Canada. They do have resources around business succession. Of course, none of them talk about cooperatives. It's not surprising. There's a small program in the province of Quebec. In Quebec, 70% of the citizens of Quebec are members of a cooperative or a credit union. Does anybody have any idea what it is in Ontario? Anyone? Any idea? Larry? No, I'm not. I won't put you on the spot. 14% of Ontarians are members of a credit union or a co-op. So in Quebec, there's a program that they're working with 40 different sort of small business enterprise centers, but they are actually regional development enterprise centers. They have co-op developers in those. We have nothing like that in Ontario. we have the Ontario Cooperative Association, and we have the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation, which is, Canada-wide, that can help with business succession. And of course, the Worker Co-op Federation is particularly interested in the idea of the employees taking over the business, right, and making it a worker-owned business. So there's a number of those in Toronto, the Big Carrots one, Urbane Cyclist, there's a few others. Of course, the Mountain Equipment Co-op. How many people are members of the Mountain Equipment Co-op? Most people. 3.5 million Canadians are members of the Mountain Equipment Co-op. Started out with 5 people in 1971. So the cooperative idea of maintaining that service in the community, maintaining those jobs and that economic entity in the community, really important motivation for this idea of cooperative succession. And of course, for a business owner, all the things that Warren was talking about earlier in terms of making sure the business is valued properly, making sure your records are all in order, making sure that the negotiations, I think a win-win negotiation, all those things are the same in a cooperative. Like a cooperative is a business too, whether it's a not-for-profit cooperative or a for-profit cooperative. So you still have to have all those business aspects. The difference is that the cooperative is an organizational structure that's recognized under the Ontario Cooperative Corporations Act. It is a legal entity on its own under a separate act versus the Business Corporations Act. And if you're a non-share not-for-profit or a share for-profit co-op, both of those are under the act. They're not under the Not-for-Profit Act. So if you're a not-for-profit co-op, you're still under the Cooperative Corporations Act. Every province has one, and the federal government, you can also incorporate federally. If you're doing business in more than one province, you can do that. You don't have to do it federally, but it is a possibility. So that's just a bit of background about the co-ops, because people are kind of interested in that. And you've read those statistics by now, so I'm just going to move on. These are slides that the Business Development Canada has available online. You can get them. I'm not going to go through all these because Warren did a fabulous job going over all this stuff. I'm just going to skip to my slides on the cooperative. Okay, so there's basically 5 conditions that are up there that if you're interested in transferring your business, or if you're in a community where there's a possibility of taking over an existing business as a cooperative, these 5 conditions have to be in play. Number 1, you have to have the cooperation of the owner. If the owner's not interested in looking at this cooperative structure, they don't understand it, well, who's going to own it and who's going to control it, or I just want someone to come and buy my business. If they're not willing to even consider it, then that's a no-go decision-making point, right? So you really have to have an owner that is willing enough to be educated about a cooperative. A lot of people don't know anything about cooperatives, and they may have some negative stereotypes about cooperatives. The reality is, for businesses, cooperatives have twice the success rate of regular businesses. And there's lots of reasons for that. But startup businesses, like Warren was saying earlier, startup businesses, 80% of them fail in the first 10 years. It's not a very good success rate, right? Cooperatives, 4 out of 10 survive the first 10 years, so it's twice as good. In agriculture and food, it's 90% survival rate. But when you're retaining a business that's already got a going concern, it's got a cash flow, it has customers, it has an operation, it's so much easier to take that over as a cooperative versus trying to start one from scratch. Starting a business from scratch is a lot harder. And I've helped start well over 180 co-op businesses over the last 30 years. And the success rate has been great. I don't take credit for that myself, but about 70% success rate for those cooperatives. And they're all different sizes and all different industries. Like any kind of business can be organized that way. So number 2, the employees in the community have to be interested, obviously, in doing this and taking the responsibility. In the 90s, I helped a travel agency become a worker cooperative. And the biggest part of that transition, like the financing, the legal, the accounting, all that stuff was really quite straightforward. the biggest concern was the shift in paradigm from being an employee to becoming a manager, or understanding that now I'm an owner of this business and it's not just 9 to 5 anymore. Like now we actually have to have board meetings. We need to sit down and work out a strategy. We're not just going to do what the boss tells us. We are the boss, right? The cooperative members are the boss. That transition really took them about 1 or 2 years, but it's really interesting because it was mostly women that happened to be the travel agents in the agency, so they became worker owners in the business. And they had a guy that was the manager. Within the first year, they fired him. So, because he wasn't doing a proper job, frankly. And I mean, it's just funny because it's just totally flipped, right? I mean, before they could have been fired by the manager. And when they took over the business as a worker co-op, now they hire the manager. The manager reports to the board of directors. So like a regular corporation, a cooperative corporation is limited liability and it has a board of directors. Unlike a corporation, a cooperative is a democratic organization. So it's one member, one vote. And the members of the co-op elect their board of directors, just like a regular election, right, at the annual general meeting. So it is a very different animal from a cultural point of view and how the human interaction occurs on a day-to-day basis between the cooperative members. And I think more importantly, what you'll see in the cooperatives, and this is a great advantage for a business takeover by a cooperative, when employees own part of the business, when they share in the profits, and when they help make decisions and have some control over their workplace, productivity goes way up. So it's a really great advantage for an existing owner to sell the business to their employees from that point of view. Because most business owners who've spent a generation or maybe 2 generations building up a business, they want to see that thing continue. It's their legacy, right? I mean, it's something that they really have an emotional attachment to, and they need to let go of that when they sell it. However, they want to see it continue and thrive and succeed. So I think that employee aspect is really important. Warren's already talked about the going concern, so I'm not going to go into that anymore. Trust. So, these accounting, I was trained as a chartered accountant, so the accounting aspects, the legal aspects, the agreements, all those technical things, they're important. And I totally agree with Warren. Get the professional help you need. Don't try and do it all yourself. However, the hardest part is the emotional part. So building trust between the parties, that is so essential. Absolutely essential. In the end, that may very well be the thing that will scuttle a deal, right? If there's a breach of trust or people just don't feel right about it, or, there's all that human emotion. And one of the things that makes family business succession fail so often, because that is not a great model, that's the irony. Most small business people think, well, my son or my daughter are going to take over the business. No. Have you talked to them? Do you know if they actually do want to take over the business? I work with a lot of farms. That's another kind of business succession, right? When farmers pass it on. So a lot of those kids don't want to take over the farm. So where are the successor people going to come from? The emotional aspects that are involved with a family business takeover add about 3 or 4 levels of complexity compared to someone from the outside. Because there's all those family dynamics, all that emotional baggage that people are bringing along, right? I mean, I'm not saying all families are screwed up. It's not what I'm saying. But just keep in mind that those emotional trust, human aspects are really key ingredients to a successful transition. And I already talked about this too, the win-win. There's some great books. Oh, I think that might be my phone, sorry. I think there are some great books about win-win negotiations, like Getting to Yes. And I think it's really important for people to understand that you can do things differently. It's not a zero-sum game. And the thing about cooperatives is, it's not who's going to get, what slice of the pie. It's how can we create another pie. So it's really an idea about, multiplying the business, growing the business over time, but also finding new ways to be more productive and find creative ways where people can share in the benefits of what they're creating. Because the reality is that the employees in the business are creating the surplus value of the business. They create the profits over time, right? And so the idea around this employee takeover is that they're then going to be rewarded for that. Does anyone have any questions at this point while I put this on sleep? Anybody? Yeah. Go ahead.
So when you mentioned that the women fired the manager, I'm curious then, as an owner, what role do you play and what are the chances of you getting booted out?
So as an owner, right? You want to know what role you play?
Right.
Okay. So you could initiate this, right? You could educate yourself about cooperatives, about the possibility, and then you would have to talk to the employees or people in your community to see if there's any interest in taking over the business. So an owner could definitely initiate this. There are so many sources of information and resources out there that you could easily get overwhelmed about the cooperative, because if you do a Google search, you'll get 6 billion searches or something, like answers. So it would be really worthwhile to contact the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation or the Ontario Cooperative Association, because they can just steer you, much more succinctly and quickly to the important aspects, right? And we've got some handouts at the back table there that provide that information.
But is your role secure as an owner? Or
It can be. Whatever you, like when I talk with people, I always say everything's negotiable, right? So if the existing owner wants to maintain a role in the business, you can negotiate that, right?
Are you asking, as a member of a co-op, can you be booted out of
Yes.
membership?
As a member of a co-op, any member can be booted out, yes.
The owner member.
Well, again, it's like any business. If the person's not performing, then they've got to go, right? So it's more about performance appraisal and, using proper progressive discipline and that sort of thing. We are working right now with a business in Whitby, and what they do is they provide good used cars. They have their own garage as well, and a loan for people who can't get a loan from a bank because they don't have a credit rating. So it's usually lower income people, but without a car, they can't get a job, right? So this business is in the transition of having a sole owner to becoming an employee and potentially other investors as different class of owners in a cooperative. And that owner will stay there as the CEO of the cooperative. And we're negotiating that, and that's been agreed to and discussed right up front. So, it really, however you want to structure that, then you need to discuss that, and obviously you have to have the agreement of both parties, over here and then over there.
You may get into this after, but can you talk a little bit, is there a distinction between co-op ownership and employee share ownership sales?
Yes, there is. That's a very good question. So ESOPs, or employee stock ownership plans, which are very common in the United States, because there's legislation on capital gains tax that are a big advantage for owners to sell their business to the employees. We don't have that tax advantage in Canada. There is an ESOP association in Canada. There are people that specialize in that area. It would be an incorporated business under the Business Corporations Act, an ESOP. So it is different than a co-op. ESOPs are not necessarily democratic organizations. They are not incorporated generally under the Cooperative Corporations Act. And that's really the main difference. Employees in employee stock ownership plans and in worker co-ops or employee co-ops both share in the profits, both are owning shares, but it's about control in the end. In most ESOPs, it's a minority shareholding position for the employees. So they don't really have control, certainly not over the board of directors, and therefore, all the decision making. Does that answer your question? Yep.
In replying to this young woman's question, you referred almost obliquely to different share classes,
Right.
and different stakeholders. Could you explain the differences between share classes and the multi-stakeholder approach to structuring a co-op?
Okay, sure. No, that's great. Okay, so under the Cooperative Corporations Act, you can have a non-share cooperative So no shares, but you can sell bonds and debentures like the CSI is selling community bonds right now, right? Co-ops have been doing that for 150 years. So there's bonds and debentures. And then you've got share co-ops where you can sell member shares, preferred shares, different classes of preferred shares. You can also sell bonds and debentures. You can have member loans. It's a very flexible structure in terms of financing and the kind of instruments, financial instruments that you can use to raise the capital. So if you're going to take over an existing business, say as a multi-stakeholder, you brought that term up, multi-stakeholder co-op, it's just what it sounds like. And it is a recognized structure in the Ontario Cooperative Corporations Act. Not every province recognizes that structure, but in a multi-stakeholder, you would have different classes of membership. So you could have an employee class of membership. You could have a client or customer class or consumer class of membership. You could have a class of membership of organizations. So it really depends on whatever need the co-op is meeting. Co-ops are based on the idea, fundamental idea, that there's a need that needs to be fulfilled in the community. When you identify that need, then you start identifying, well, who does it make sense to have members of this co-op to fulfill this need? So for example, if there's a need for childcare, which there is a need for childcare as it turns out, because our federal government has never implemented any kind of childcare program. So co-ops fit that need. And women, and mostly women and men, set up childcare co-ops. And the members generally are the parents. So there's about, I think there's 6,000 or 7,000 childcare co-ops in Ontario. So just an example. Now, that's not a multi-stakeholder, but you could have, like in Italy, for example, the social co-ops in Italy, which a childcare co-op or an educational institution or home care or other kind of elder care, the members of the co-op would include the caregivers, so they're the workers, right? As well as the clients. The clients are also members. So that's a multi-stakeholder co-op. You have two stakeholders in that case.
What are the differences in either influence, authority, membership, status?
Right. Usually what happens is, let's say you have a board of directors of 7 or 9 people, right? And different classes of membership would elect a determined number of board members onto that board of directors. So let's say there's 7. And the employees, and it's an employee consumer co-op. Like a lot of the food co-ops now, the local organic food co-ops are using that structure. Whereas they used to be food co-ops like Karma Food Co-op here in Toronto was a consumer co-op. Now the employees are also members, and sometimes the producers or the farmers. So you have 3 classes of membership. So they would have their designated number of representatives on the board of directors. At the annual general meeting, each of those membership groups would caucus separately and elect their board representatives. So if there's 7 board members, maybe the employees would have 3 board members, and the producers would have 2, and the consumers would have 2, for example, right? So that's how you try and equalize some of the power.
Can I clarify though?
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? But no matter what the structure is in the different membership classes for the shares, it's always 1 share, 1 vote.
That's correct.
Yeah.
You can only own 1 membership share in a cooperative, and that gives you the right to vote.
Yeah.
In a corporation, you could own 51%, 100% of the voting shares, whatever. There's other questions, please.
Just to clarify on Zell's point question, and then each class would have to approve fundamental changes to the corporation. So
That's correct.
It's essentially class veto, right? That would exist.
Yeah, like basically at the annual general meeting, other than electing the board of directors, all the people at the annual general meeting from all the different classes of stakeholders would vote on resolutions or changes to bylaws or anything like that. And in co-ops generally, if a co-op's going to be wound down or if there's going to be some major change, usually 2/3 vote is required. There was a question over here. Yeah, okay, over right here. Yeah, go ahead.
Through your experience over the past 30 years with 170 businesses you've helped sort of move into the co-op structure, how have you found it's impacted their competitive kind of edge?
Right.
As a small business owner, one of my competitive competitive advantages is I can move much faster than my larger competition.
Right.
And I'm able to meet consumer needs almost as they arise.
Right.
I'm picturing this democratic structure and it's a little nerve-wracking,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
How do you, like, through your experience, maybe there's
Sure.
an increased competitive edge because you have more minds, or maybe
Okay.
it slows down.
Yeah. Well, that's a really great question. You have to differentiate between the day-to-day operations and the governance of the organization, right? On a day-to-day basis in terms of the management of the business and the flexibility and the fleetness of foot to make changes, there's no reason why a co-op can't be exactly the same as your business operation on a day-to-day basis. The difference is on a governance level, longer-term policy, ownership, those bigger decisions around compensation. Like most co-ops, worker co-ops generally have a 4-to-1 ratio, highest paid to lowest paid, right? Some of them are 10-to-1. But big corporations in Canada, it's like 300-to-1. So that's a problem of equality, right? And so the co-op governance allows that control to be maintained by the workers to make sure that they have an egalitarian workplace. But on a day-to-day operational level, like if you're running a food store, you better have fresh produce and good customer service and a clean store, and it's going to look exactly the same as a regular business. So that's why I said up front, like even if it's a not-for-profit business, it's still got to be run like a business, right? So that's important. Does that answer your question?
Sort of.
I mean, on a decision-making level, on an operational day-to-day decision-making level, you have to have a clear definition of key accountability areas, job descriptions, performance appraisal, all those things, right? I would say that potentially there is a co-op advantage, particularly when the employees are involved because of that productivity gain, and they require less supervision
Yeah.
because they take the responsibility.
That's my second question is how do you, like, getting people to take that responsibility?
Yes.
Is in your 30 years, has that been in, do you find that happens naturally? Is it a tough process, completely case by case?
I think it's a paradigm shift for people, right? From being an employee to being an owner. And I think it requires training, it requires support, it requires people to, at some point, make that mental and emotional shift as well. So I think it's a transition. And for some people, they're not going to make that transition.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with still having some worker owners, but you can still have some employees too. They don't all, you can't force someone to become a member of a co-op. It's voluntary, right? So if some people don't want to become members of a worker co-op, they just want to keep their job and be an employee, that's fine.
Well, what if I want to become a member, yet I don't exhibit the behavior of that?
Of becoming an owner?
Yeah. Like,
Well, that's a problem. I mean, first of all, you got to put money on the line because you have to invest in the business, right? So that's a bit of a test.
Yeah.
And then over time, the structure is going to change. It's going to become less hierarchical. And you're going to need, in a larger business, certainly fewer levels of management, right? Not as relevant to smaller, medium-sized enterprises that really usually have one level of management anyway. So, people may have to leave the organization because it doesn't fit for them. Okay, there's over here and then more questions. Yeah, go ahead.
This may relate to the question just asked, except moving it back in time a little bit. That I understand that there's that the change in mindset
Right.
and paradigm once the ball is rolling. But how do you get the ball rolling, particularly in a multi-stakeholder situation, where maybe there isn't a homogeneity to the community,
Yeah.
and how do you get them to buy into the idea of a co-op? Particularly because there seems to be there's a reluctance to adopt the model.
What do you base that on?
Well, just I've been floating the idea, and they go, "Ooh, co-op, I don't know."
You're
That's,
floating it to who?
To members of a multi-stakeholder scenario.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say this, right, that multi-stakeholder co-ops are more complicated
Yeah.
because you've got all those different players, and in fact, they have some built-in inherent conflicts, right? Like consumers in a consumer co-op want good value, low prices. Workers want higher wages and lower working hours and less service in a sense. So there's built-in contradictions there. But to get to your point, it's really about education. And it's about people taking the initiative to educate themselves, as well as bringing, people in to help educate them about co-ops, reading some materials, having discussion groups, having a facilitator come in and, answer questions for them. I mean, getting someone like me to come in to answer people's questions, like just at a meeting, so that they can understand what they might or might not be getting into, right? So I really think it's an education process. And it's not for everybody. Like, some people just want a job.
Yeah.
So if you just want a job, then don't do it as a worker co-op. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, it's more, it's not so much jobs, it's more on the user end of it, where they particularly don't.
I mean, people need to
see the
understand.
value of the having control over the.
I think the hardest thing in any of these organizations, including business organizations, is having a shared vision for what the business can be. So if you have a multi-stakeholder co-op, then you want to make sure that all those players have the same shared vision, because it's not about just their stake in the co-op or what they're going to get from the co-op. It's about the co-op as a whole, right? And it's going to be an ongoing, creative, co-creative, negotiating process between those stakeholders to make sure all their needs are getting fulfilled, right? That's why multi-stakeholder co-ops are more complicated, because you have 3 or 4 maybe different needs that are trying to get fulfilled instead of one key need, right? So it's tricky.
Yeah.
But
So
if there's
also-
goodwill and trust in the organization and mutual respect, that's where, like, the social capital comes in, right? And it's going to be the make it or break it point, just like the emotions in the family business succession. For a cooperative, it is the human interaction that is the most difficult part. And one colleague of mine who's been a co-op developer for 35 years out in Nova Scotia, he always said, if we could only just get people to cooperate, it'd be a lot easier to set up cooperatives, right? So yeah, that is a challenge. People have to have that frame of reference that it's not about me, it's about we.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, over here. Yeah, you have another question.
I don't want to get off track, but I've been a member of the board of a collective for about 7 years.
Okay.
And we've just gone through a change. We had a radical change in the regulatory and legal environment. We had a pressure, we had to downsize and stuff. What we've also done, and it's taken about 2 years, is moved from a constituency-based board of directors, it still votes, it's a not-for-profit collective, to a competency-based board. We're just implementing that now. Now, is that something there's a parallel in the co-op movement? Those things happen?
Yeah, I mean, you're always, boards of directors are, but you could do a whole workshop on that, obviously,
Yeah.
but, boards of directors are a challenge, and maintaining the skills on the board of directors and getting the new skills and new people on there is an ongoing challenge for any organization, including co-ops. But definitely, it's important to identify what are the skills that the board of directors needs, and then you try and recruit those people.
Right.
And then they need to get elected at the annual general meeting, right? So
Yeah.
it is a political process, but they also, at an annual general meeting, each of those proponents or prospective board members would make a little speech about why they think they should be on the board of directors, what they're bringing to it. So if you look at the Mountain Equipment Co-op, and if you're a member there, every year they have this board of directors election, and they have little bios of the people and what
Yeah.
skills they're bringing. And so I think it's a combination of those two. You do need the right skills on the board. Very important.
And from a legal perspective, is there do collectives come under some of the same regulation as co-ops, or are they
It
separate?
sounds like your collective, the regulatory change that you're talking about might be the new Canada Not-for-Profit Corporation Act.
No, that's we've all been had to deal with that.
Okay, so if you're incorporated under, the Not-for-Profit Corporation Act, that is different than the Cooperative Corporations Act. But you can also operate and cooperate with other people as an unincorporated association.
That's possible
Right.
too. That's absolutely
And
possible.
I know lots of organizations that do that, and they never incorporate, and they don't need to. So they have a constitution, they have bylaws, they operate
We have
like
no
a
limited-
democratic organization.
No limited liability.
That's right. That's a challenge.
That's yeah.
So there was, yes.
So how do you boot somebody out if the person doesn't work out? Do they get their initial investment back, or do they get a specific share of the company? how's that worked out is question one.
So, okay, so how you get booted out, if you're an employee in an employee co-op and your performance appraisal is not up to snuff, then you have to follow all the same rules and regulations as you would, in any labor situation, right? So there's got to be hopefully a just dismissal, and you've done the thing properly and progressive discipline and all that. So that's one aspect. Now, if they're a member of the co-op and they're employees, so they got fired. Now you're going to withdraw their membership because they can no longer be a member of a co-op. So there's steps that are detailed in the Cooperative Corporations Act to follow. But basically the board of directors would withdraw their membership, and they would get back whatever shares that they'd invested, or membership fee if it was refundable. Sometimes membership fees are not refundable. And any share of the profits or accumulated dividends that were due to them. So, or there's a member loan or whatever it might be. So any financial obligations that the cooperative is holding on behalf of that member would be paid back when they leave the cooperative.
And you sort of led to the fact of the dividend. How do actually the members decide whether to take dividends at the end of the year or not? Who actually, does everybody decide that, or the core membership, or the employees at end? Like, how does that work out?
So in most cooperatives, at least a part of the surplus is going to be kept as retained earnings, right? So, let's say a third, and you can put that into your bylaws, or you can even put it in your articles of incorporation in terms of distribution of surplus and rules about how it's going to be distributed and who it would be distributed to and that sort of thing. Or you can leave it fully up to the discretion of the board of directors, depending on the financial performance that year. Obviously, if there's not a healthy surplus, you're not going to be declaring dividends, right? Cooperatives, like other organizations, corporations, can also provide a share dividend, not a cash dividend. So you could issue more shares as a dividend versus providing cash, right? You can also accumulate dividends over time and not pay them out, and pay them out when you have the cash flow to do that. So it's pretty flexible and open, but I would say in general, it's the board of directors that are going to make that decision. And at any time in a cooperative, if the members are not happy with the board of directors, they can kick the board of directors out and elect a new board of directors. So there's full recall on the board of directors. It is a democratic organization.
And one last question. Say, for instance, you were saying that there's great success with co-ops, but some, of course, don't work out.
Right.
If there's loss that year, how is that absorbed? Like, say, for instance, there's a loss of like $100,000.
Right.
Is that dispersed throughout the co-op members?
Yeah, it'd be the same as the profit. It's loss sharing. Profit sharing and loss sharing, right? It goes both ways.
And what if somebody can't pay that?
Well, it's not necessarily a question of can't paying it. It's a question of whether the business can survive, right? If it has enough cash flow. I mean, if the business goes bankrupt, the co-op shareholders are going to be near the bottom of the list, because who's at the top? The bank, the creditors, the suppliers, right? The employees will be there somewhere, but the co-op shareholders, just like in a regular corporation, will be at the bottom of the list.
It's still limited liability.
It is.
Still unlimited?
No, limited.
So there's a question here and then over here.
Just from a number of questions that have come up here, it sounds like some people are owners. And so a question would be, when you, in the history that you've worked with co-op, how many owners actually stay involved, or do they sell to a co-op and get out?
Most of the owners sell and get out, yeah. And I think from an emotional point of view, that's the easiest thing to do. We had a situation in our own community with the Erin Theatre Co-op. We took over our movie theatre in our community as a not-for-profit co-op. I have a bunch of slides, I haven't gotten to them, but I can show you some of those. How much time do we have left?
We're going until 10:30.
10:30, okay, we'll have enough time. So that person had basically been like the entrepreneur and had run that theater for 34 years. And the agreement from the very beginning was that he was going to leave and he was going to retire, and he'd had a heart attack, and his wife really wanted him to leave too. And then just about a week before we closed the final sale and the purchase agreement, he said, I want to stay working here. And we said, well, no, that's not the agreement. This was like a year later. Right? That's not the agreement. We're not going to do that. We're going to become digital. We're moving from 35 millimeter. in some ways, we didn't want him there anyway, for lots of reasons, right? Then he went rogue in the community, right? And he started bad-mouthing the co-op and stuff in the community. So we basically just got our lawyer to do a cease and desist, and he stopped. But it was really unfortunate, because to be honest, he could have been a hero in the community. And, you know, we'd already provided him with a lifetime membership, him and his wife and his family and all that stuff. Like, there was a lot of goodwill that was literally flushed down the toilet because that owner couldn't let go. And he just needed to let go. But it was completely emotional, it was irrational, the whole thing, right?
And that's a very common problem that I've seen. And sometimes the owners start off before they meet the buyer wanting to retire, but as the process goes on, they don't necessarily want to let go. And they get worried.
Yeah, my business has never been in better shape. Like, yeah, this is great.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So there's another question over here.
So there's 500,000 businesses coming up for sale in the next couple of decades. Sounds to me like a supply and demand issue to some degree.
Yeah.
And whether there's going to be enough buyers
Right.
for this. So, aside from the issue of whether that will depress prices, what I'm more interested in is the relationship that you've drawn between co-ops and private companies and startup situations and their success failure rates. In this situation, you're taking over an existing business. There isn't an issue about a startup failure rate.
No, there is. Not startup, though, because
Right, so what
family business transfers generally aren't very successful.
Well, what I'm looking to understand is how you measure the success. We know that out of that 500,000 businesses, many of them are simply jobs for people.
Sure.
There might be franchises that they're locked into. There may be, corner variety stores, with minimal number of employees. These are simply jobs for people.
Right.
So when you talk about the success potential of the co-op model, how do you define that success? Is it surviving or is it thriving? And how do you provide some measurement?
It's probably both, but yeah, you're right. I mean, does it really make sense to take over a convenience store that's run by two people as a co-op? Probably not. You want to have something that's maybe a little larger institution. But if it is a cultural institution, for example, then like a theater or, something like that, or a recreational facility where there's lots of users, there may be few employees, then that would make sense. Success would mean that the business is retained in the community and continues as a viable economic entity, so it's sustainable financially, but also I think that it continues to meet the need for that service or product in the community. So does it have to grow? Not necessarily. If it's meeting the need in the community and it's the right size and it's all good, just retaining that service in the community is a success, right? Even if it doesn't make huge profits. I mean, it's not about, co-ops aren't about making huge profits. They're about fulfilling the need of the members and the people in the community. So that is number one. You're not going to become a millionaire by being a member of a co-op. That's not going to happen. You can have if it's a worker co-op, you could have a nice retirement and you get paid a decent wage, because one of the things about worker co-ops is to have a living wage. That's an objective. That's success. That's a measure of success. Not exploiting labor and having capital rule labor, but labor ruling capital. That is a fundamental principle. So, does that answer your question? Yes. Okay. Anyone else? Yeah.
Okay. The actual transition seems to be quite a complex series of processes. Okay, so I'm not marketing myself. I'm trying to market.
Go ahead.
The other people. So, for example, Warren, would you advise people on an hourly basis on people who are working to be a co-op, to change the structure, and with your experience of helping be able to help the people here if they want to go to you?
So, what I advise,
if there's a group of people,
if there's a group of people
could
who
be
want
the people
to,
here,
yes,
and they said yes, now we want to see about the next step.
and they say, see, the decision to go co-op versus business corporation that is not a legal decision, it's a business decision based on your objectives and your
Right.
vision for the business, right? So, I mean, I wouldn't tell you, I would never say to somebody, incorporate a business corporation. No, incorporate a co-op. No, incorporate a nonprofit, because that group has to decide for itself what kind of business it wants.
But then once they make that decision, you'd be able to help them in the
Yes,
format.
yes,
Okay.
yes. Because many of the issues that I canvassed and that Russ has canvassed, they're similar, right? There's a process that you can go through, but there's slightly different tweaks for a co-op, particularly in the government structure.
Now, what was your first name again, pardon me?
Russ.
So Russ, I mean, if I was a co-op member or someone, I wish you lived in Toronto so we could ask you more questions. So, but you're not going to come in and be advisory to people. Are
Oh,
there
yeah, I do
people-
that.
You do that?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I like you. I'm also a chartered.
I like you too.
So,
That's why these networking things at CSI are so successful.
This is goodwill, right here.
right. So, anyway, okay, I will. Because you laughed, I can do a little. I also have a social conscience, and
Yes.
I like either to volunteer or earn money
Right.
by advising people on the steps that they have.
Right.
Because I have about 30 years experience. We can talk about both when
Great.
the year we got our CA and who
Yeah,
we know
yeah.
in common later. But anyway.
Fantastic. That's wonderful. We'll talk after the thing. Great. There was other question. Yeah.
So, I'm curious a lot about that initial transition. And I have two questions related to it. One is probably a simpler one, which is if you're looking at a unionized environment, particularly if you have some union members, some non-union members, and multiple unions operating, how that complicates or facilitates the switch. But the other part is, so if I'm working at I'm working a medium-sized enterprise, a small factory, if the owner wants to retire, doesn't have a buyer, it shuts down, I'm out of a job. If the owner wants to retire, sells to me, things don't work out, and it shuts down, I'm out of a job, I might have lost my house at the same time because of buying that initial membership fee. Are there any financing or risk management kind of systems available in Ontario to help lower the financial risk for potential member buyer? I
You
know
mean
we
from
don't-
a co-op point of view, or? Or
This is
just
more
in
likely-
general?
So like Quebec has the solidarity funds,
Yeah.
which can provide a little bit of that backstop. Is there any equivalent in Ontario, or thinking that, if we're looking at potentially a transition of hundreds, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of businesses, there should be some risk pooling potential there. I'm wondering if there's anything set up to.
Well, Ontario had the labor-sponsored investment funds, and one of them, which is no longer around, it was bought out by another one. Like, there's been a lot of consolidation in that area, right? And it was sponsored by the Steelworkers, First Ontario Fund it was called. And one of its mandates was to create worker-owned workplaces, and they did consider 2 or 3 buyouts of existing businesses to become worker co-ops, but none of them happened. I know the United Steelworkers of America in the United States is working with the Mondragon worker cooperative system from Spain. If anyone's interested in looking at an amazing system, look at Mondragon cooperative system in Spain. So they're working together to talk about how they can do some of these worker buyouts and transition. But I think you put your finger on a really important point, which is the capitalization. And that's a challenge. It's a challenge with regular businesses too. But, the opportunity with cooperatives in terms of capitalization is interesting because you can tap into pools of capital that you wouldn't necessarily be able to tap into if it's a conventional takeover, right? Because there are people in the community that are interested in investing in that if it maintains a service that they'd like to keep in their community. If it's employees, they're investing in their own jobs, like you're saying, right? If it's a unionized environment, then you want to have the union at the table right away from the beginning, from the outset, to have those discussions. I mean, you want to make sure that the union and that representation is going to continue if that's what the employees want to do. I mean, they're the ones who decide whether or not they want to keep the union, because you can decertify a union too, so based on an employee vote. But the unions can bring some valuable resources to the table as well, right, in terms of lawyers and other professionals. So I think every situation is going to be unique. I mean, when I'm helping people start a co-op from scratch, even if, like, I've helped start dozens of local food co-ops, right? Everyone's different. Like, you think that you could take some kind of template and just, make it work. Doesn't work that way. And it's because the people are different. And they, have some similar motivations, like it's food co-ops, so they want good food and stuff. But they also have different circumstances in their community. So it really depends on the situation. You've asked so many questions. They're good.
I got one last one.
Okay, but is there anyone else first? Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead.
This is maybe just a philosophical question, but to what extent is it really possible to purchase goodwill? This is really a question for Warren. You referred to the gold mine being goodwill.
Yeah. Well, that goes back to the challenge of being able to transfer the goodwill. I can tell you that in a lot of the deals that you do, a good portion of the purchase price is basically allocated to goodwill. But what that really means is the synergy that comes about from the trade name, right? The employees, the relationship with the suppliers, the relationship with the customers, and to some degree, the location, right? You're looking at those 5 factors, seeing how they combine to be able to essentially act like a magnet for clients to come in and purchase from the business, right? So transferring the goodwill is an exercise of transferring those 5 things, right? And it's kind of part and parcel with keeping the owner around, introducing the buyer to the employees, introducing the buyer to the suppliers, and having the buyer essentially develop a business track record to be able to essentially assume that role that the owner used to have.
Can I sort of answer that question now? There usually is goodwill, and if your business or whatever it has is of a size that it would be significant, then I would suggest hiring, or it could be through the broker or just through your accountant, a business valuator who will independently verify within a range
Yeah.
the value of that goodwill.
Yeah, that's really important. Like, getting to the business valuation, that's critical, and you really need some outside expertise to help you do that, like the certified business valuator. Okay, your question. Yes.
Last question. I promise.
No, that's okay.
Another
That's
question.
fine. No, go ahead.
Earlier, you were describing different, getting back to this sort of multi-stakeholder approach in different classes and different groups. And
Right.
you used the word organizations as a possible class
Yes.
of membership. Are there any types of entities, like a nonprofit under the current new nonprofit legislation, or charities, or other types of entities that are disqualified from becoming members of co-ops?
They're not disqualified like legally if the co-op doesn't accept them as a member. Like, usually a member has to apply to a co-op and be accepted by the board of directors,
Simply looking
right?
at the regulations, not what the board may decide.
Yeah, there's nothing stopping that from happening that I'm aware of. I'm not a lawyer, but I've never seen that be a problem.
Warren, do you know anything about that?
No, that's actually a question I was thinking about. That do you have to be a human being to be a member of a co-op?
No, you don't.
If that's
You
the
can
case,
be an organization.
if you can be an incorporated entity, then the answer is no.
There's a lot of co-ops, like buying co-ops, that have corporations, like Home Hardware is kind of an example, right?
Yeah.
Where they've come together and they pool their purchasing power, and that way they're able to compete on price and quality, and they have their own brand name and blah, blah, blah. But that's why they did it.
Now, the only issue with that would be if they happen to be in a regulated industry, and the regulations specific to the industry restrict who's allowed to be an owner in a particular business. And I've seen that in some circumstances.
Like the pharmacies you're talking about.
So with that question then, if an organization is a member of a co-op, who comes to the meetings to represent the organization, or is everybody who belongs to the organization?
Right. No, it would be a delegate from
Yeah.
that particular organization. The organization would choose who their representative would be.
That's pretty much all of corporate. Corporate law is all about who has the authority to act for a corporation. What human being wears the mantle of the corporation at a given point in time. So you assign a delegate.
Yeah.
I think there's a few of us that are owners that are really interested in the co-op. And it sounds like maybe that might not be successful, or your experience is that usually the bosses becoming part of the co-op is not, I think I heard as desirable or as successful.
No, not necessarily. I think it really depends on the situation.
My question is, what elements would be necessary or characteristics, or what can we do to make it successful?
Okay, that's a
Because I
great,
think-
that's a
yeah.
great question.
I'll just give my example. I think some of us are in the same boat. We have a lot of young people
Yeah.
that I think we can continue to mentor.
Right.
I'm about 10 years away from retirement,
Yeah,
but I want to plan that now, and I want to create the environment where people want to be part of the new entity.
right.
And if that happens in 5 years, good, or 10, or like, I think because everyone is young that works for us, they don't have the cash right now. So
No.
I think the other, Warren, one of the things is, try to get them to buy in early on. That's not possible.
Well, it is possible, but they could do it from a wage checkoff over
Oh,
time.
okay. A lot, okay. So my question is, what would be the elements that could possibly
Yeah.
make it a success?
So that's a great question. So basically, to keep the existing owner as part of the business as you move forward, right? So you got to have the trust. Like, that is essential, and you have to have the willingness of that owner to let go emotionally.
Yeah.
Like, it's no longer under their control, so they have to let go of control. And that sounds easy, but it's not easy. So, and then you need to have a transfer of knowledge from the existing owner to the employees and whoever's going to be the managers in that business, right?
It's part of the policies and stuff that I was talking about.
Yeah, all those work procedures, written work procedures, job descriptions, key accountabilities, performance appraisal systems, like understanding financial statements. Like, lots of employees maybe have never seen a financial statement.
Yeah.
Certainly most owners don't share them with their employees, but they need to be educated, financial literacy. They need to understand what the financial statements mean and how they contribute to that. Like, how does my job day to day contribute to these financial statements, right? And what's the link?
And I would add one more thing too.
Yeah, sorry, Larry, you're...
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because Russ, you weren't here at the first workshop, but maybe some of you were. One of the presenters was from a worker co-op, a bicycle delivery service, courier service in Hamilton, and he started it as a private business and wanted to cooperativize it with his employees. I think there's about 6 or 8 worker owners now, and he talks in that presentation about that transition process. And he's actually having the opposite problem of making sure the worker owners actually feel ownership and stop deferring to him, is when he's a private owner.
Right.
But that video is available on the CSI website right now, and will be on the on co-op website in the near future.
I was wondering if you've heard of any housing co-ops with a multi-stakeholder model, because of course the great thing about co-ops or a housing co-op is that it's a more democratic, empowered environment for the member owners, but I think the risk is that it doesn't necessarily apply to the staff. And one option might be to mediate that power differential as unionization. Another one I was thinking could be a multi-stakeholder model. I've never heard of something.
I'm not aware of any. That doesn't mean they don't exist, because it's amazing to me how many different co-op structures are out there. But generally in Ontario, the housing co-ops are not for profit. They were financed by CMHC, and the members are the people who live in them, the tenants, right? So, and then the employee would be an employee of the co-op. Food co-ops are a lot like any consumer co-op. So I'm not aware of any multi-stakeholder.
Employees would be members of the co-op?
Pardon me?
Did you say the employees would be members of the co-op?
Well, they could be. I mean, you could be an employee and you live in the housing co-op.
If
It's
you
possible.
live in the
Yeah.
house. Okay, so
Yeah.
just
Like the superintendent, for example.
Right.
just trying to emphasize the danger. It's
But-
pretty conventional staffing model.
It is. For housing co-ops, it is. I'm not aware myself of a multi-stakeholder model in that situation. Any other questions? I just want to provide you this little case study. So this is the Aaron Theatre Cooperative in Campbellford, where I live. And that is like our logo from the marquee. The theater was originally started in 1949. And we had a community meeting to decide whether or not to take the theater over. And this is Ken Layton. He's a local HVAC contractor, but he also writes and sings his own songs, and he's in a band. So he wrote this song, Sharing the Aaron, and he changes the lyrics every time he sings it. It's hilarious. So he performed at the community meeting because we wanted it to be fun for people, right? I mean, it's a cultural industry and it's fun and entertaining, so we wanted to do that. After we had that community meeting, about 130 people signed up as members, which was good because there was only 140 in the audience that night. And then we had to raise the capital. So we were asking people to buy memberships, $20 as an individual or $40 for a family membership. Then we were selling bonds of $100 denomination, and we were selling anywhere from $100 to $50,000. We needed to raise about $150,000 doing that. So it's not a lot of money, but we're in a small rural community. We are not in Toronto. So one of the things we did is, you know this movie, It's a Wonderful Life, right? And how at the end he gets bailed out because they lost the money from the home savings and loan. So we ran that movie and said, hey, and we ran articles in the newspaper and said, if you guys don't come to our rescue, we're not going to make it, right? We want our George Bailey moment for our theater. And, you know, it was all emotional, right? It was all the emotional tug, and it worked. So it was a marketing strategy. Anyway, there's the money. I talked a little bit about that and how we raised the money. We also, movie theaters, there's fewer and fewer independent movie theaters. Cineplex controls 80% of the market in Canada. So it's a monopoly, basically. We had to transfer from 35 millimeter film technology to digital technology. That was about $100,000. So first we bought the business, which was basically a failed business. Like, it was not a going concern, to be honest. So we already broke one of our rules. But the community wanted to keep this thing alive and keep it going. And we felt confident that we could digitize the theater and really get the young audiences back. We'd lost all the young audiences because we never had on-release movies and they were going to Peterborough or Belleville or whatever, right? So we created this whole approach where we got some grant funding because we're a not-for-profit through Trillium, the Community Foundation in Campbellford, and the municipality to finance that purchase of the digital projector and sound system. That's the membership growth. So we have a population of 3,500 people in Campbellford and 4,500 in the rural area surrounding, like farmers and people on acreages. So we've got around 1,300 members now. We started out with 130. Getting those members to renew is challenging. I love this picture because this is a photograph of a fundraiser for the schools, the local schools in our community. And they did this whole theme of the fundraiser around the Aaron Theatre when we were saving it in the Miracle on 34th Street. And that was all created by volunteers, that whole display. And they did, you know, a Santa Claus parade float. Tapping into the volunteer energy in your community is a huge advantage of a cooperative model. This is the hard asset growth. So we went from a value of about $175,000. We've more than doubled that over the last 5 years. There's the old projector and the new one. Quite different. Press play on the new one. You had to splice the film and everything on the 35 millimeter. That was our first digital movie. You can see it's all teenagers. Like, that was a huge breakthrough for our theater because, like I said, the teenagers weren't coming anymore. So we showed the Hunger Games, and there they were. Then we do stuff for the older folks, too, like we have TIFF series and things like that. And we always try and make it fun, so we do this paparazzi thing. And, you know, it's just, the idea is to just have fun doing it. And that's the numbers in terms of, when we started, there was an accumulated deficit. Now there's an accumulated surplus, and you can see that the annual sales have almost tripled. And there's volunteers. These are the people that took all the old seats out of the theater and put new seats in. We didn't hire a firm to do it. We did it ourselves in our community. So one of the values of cooperatives is self-reliance. That's what this represents. And it was amazing because we had twice as many volunteers sign up than we needed. We actually had to turn people away. There's the new seats. And then this is, I tried to quantify the value of the volunteers, right? Over the years. So I sort of put like, okay, $20 an hour for a board member and how much time, and, you know, $15 an hour for someone who's helping put seats in or whatever. So It's quite a bit of money when you think about it. These are some of the marketing things that we did with some young people last summer around each movie in the summer, because summer's the big season, right? And the population doubles because it's kind of a cottage area. So did all this kind of promotion. It was in the newspaper every week. It's hilarious. And then just the leveraged resources. So, and you can see the goodwill. We've grown the goodwill, the value of that significantly, the bonds, the grants, and the volunteer time. So in terms of lessons learned around that particular case example of taking over a private business and making it into a not-for-profit, in this case, community cooperative that's owned by the users, like a consumer group. So it's a consumer co-op, basically. We have one full-time employee, and then we have some part-time employees. One of the important things that the theater's always done in our community is it's provided entry-level job positions for teenagers, for high school students. So we continue to do that. But the owner was retiring, so the timing has to be right. And you have to have the collaboration and cooperation of that owner up front. That's one of the lessons learned. We talked about that before. The community support, I mean, you could see how I was valuing that financially, but it would not have gone forward if people didn't have an emotional connection to that theater and they really wanted to keep the doors open. Like, people's initial motivation is, we don't want the theater to close, we want to keep it open. And then we've grown from there, but that was the initial motivation. So there were key individuals that provided leadership and kept moving the thing forward. I mean, when I had this idea originally that we could do this, I happen to love movies too, so I thought, man, I don't want to lose the movie theater. So a lot of people did not believe me when I said that we could do this, that this could happen. I crunched the numbers, I did a feasibility study, it looked good, I presented those numbers to people, more and more people got on board from that basis. The motivation was really important, obviously, because it's an internal motivation. No one's getting rich from doing this, but they're having a lot of fun doing it, including we have concerts, comedy shows, Christmas sing-alongs. Like, it's not just a movie theater. It's like a social and community hub in the community to get people out and to get involved. And honestly, like on a Friday or Saturday night in downtown Campbellford, if it wasn't for the Air and Theatre, no one would be down there. There's nothing else going on. So it helps the restaurants, it helps the whole community, right? As a cultural economic driver in the community. The combination of business and community savvy was really important. Like, we had to have the credibility on the business aspects and the legal aspects and all those things, but just the community involvement, if we didn't have, they go hand in hand, right? So you have to have both of those things working together. It was a lot of hard work, and we had to persevere and overcome the doubters and all that kind of stuff, but now we've got an amazing thing and people want to be part of the fun, so it worked.
Can I just ask, do the film distributors give you any kind of a break? Or is
No way.
Right.
No.
Just wanted to confirm.
Yeah. In fact, like, independent theaters are kind of getting still screwed by the large Hollywood companies because they don't want us to get on-release movies now. And so we're saying, well, if you don't give us on-release movies, we're dead in the water. Is that what you want to do? You want to kill all the independent theaters? Because, digital technology was a huge thing. About 50,000 independent theaters closed on the move to digital because they couldn't afford it.
Do you deal with any independent distribution like that?
We do. Yeah, we do. And we also deal with like independent filmmakers who will come and present their film at the theater and then talk to the audience. It's awesome. It's really fun. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, it seems like you're able to draw a lot on the community spirit in Campbellford, and I know that often exists in small towns, that central trust and community. I'm just wondering how successful this model can be in a community that might really need the service of a co-op and need a business that has that kind of triple bottom line that maybe people are in precarious jobs.
Yeah.
There's that sense of community doesn't exist necessarily. How do you translate the model to work in that kind of?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you want to go into a community and sort of create that community around the cooperative, right? So I think if you clearly identify, if you do an asset sort of profile of the community and look at what the needs are in that community, and then you go in as an organizer and help to organize people and educate them around they already know they have the need, but that a co-op is a possibility, then you can build that community around the co-op specifically, right? Whereas with the Aaron Theatre, we already had the geographic community and the people who already had an emotional attachment to the theatre that they didn't want to close, right? So the community was the larger community who then became members of the Aaron Theatre Co-op. But if you're going into community that has clearly identified needs, you build the community around the co-op. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yes?
Yeah, I don't want to be a killjoy, but I think...
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I don't want to be a killjoy, but I think you have in your posting a graph of the monetary value. I think you had raised $122,000 in nets. How vital, I mean, if you couldn't do that, would it have survived like the reading?
We would have found another way to raise money. That's what would have happened. Like, I think what's important to look at is a diversity of revenue sources, right? And to look at different ways you can cobble the money together. So that happened to be the way that we did it. That's what actually happened. But we made other applications to other grants and other approaches that didn't work too. I mean, just because we were going to try things and see what we could pull together and cobble together the finances, right? So I would just say it's about perseverance and creativity. And you just don't give up. Like if you have that goal, just stick with it. And it's a lot easier to stick with it if you have other people with you in a cooperative rather than trying to do it by yourself as an individual entrepreneur. That is one of the main reasons co-ops have a higher success rate, is the emotional support people give and get from each other, right, within the cooperative.
All right. Any last questions before we wrap up? Okay, can I get a big thank you to Russ and Warren? And thank you to all of you for coming out this morning, and thank you to Larry for organizing. This is the last in the series. As I already mentioned, the videos are going to be available on the CSI website and the On Co-op website as well. I think there were some connections made today, so if you'd like to exchange contact information, please feel free to do that. So thank you again to everyone. I hope it was useful information today, and another thank you to the gentleman.
I think it went well. I think people were really animated and asked great questions, and that's always a good sign, right, in a presentation to have people involved. That's why I like to have people ask questions throughout the process, because it's more interesting and more dialogue. There's a couple really good questions, and I think the aspect around the paradigm shift for people from being an employee to an owner of a business is a really important one, and also the transition of a business owner emotionally out of a business and or maybe staying in the business, which is more rare but possible. I think those aspects are, relationship based, is challenging.